Spittal. In the 1530s, King Henry VIII would allow his militia to practice here, so you have many pubs around here called the Gun or the Artillery Arms, etc, etc, etc. It's also where there's evidence of other waves of immigrants who have come here over the years, and in fact just behind you there is really, really good evidence of those. Those amazing buildings were built by Huguenots. Now, Huguenots were French Protestants, and they came over here in escaping from religious persecution in France in 1685. Now, these people were silk weavers, incredibly skilled craftsmen, and they built about 3 blocks of these houses, and every single one of these houses is absolutely individual. Of course, when the Industrial Revolution came here and silk weaving became mechanised, these people went out of business and they left the area, and this area descended into being a slum, which it was for many, many years, a really, really dangerous and unpleasant place to be. And this is also where our prostitutes lived, just on the other side of this wonderful church. That area was known as the Wicked Quarter Mile. Really, really unpleasant part of town to be in. This church, a fantastic building, finished in 1729 by Hawksmoor, one of only 2 pupils of the great Sir Christopher Wren. I hear you've heard a little bit about him. Well, he was one of only 2 of his pupils. This church in 1888 was black. It was black with the soot from the braziers that people used to burn around here just to keep themselves warm. That market over there, Spitalfields Market, came to life in 1887, 1 year before our story begins, and in fact it was a hugely successful fruit and vegetable market, and therefore attracted people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so a good place for prostitutes to pick up business, which of course they did. As I said, they lived over there, but they were around here an awful lot. Victim number 2 was killed not on this street, but the next street along. And some people believe that the ghost of victim number 3 lives in the cellar of that pub there, the 10 Bells. A dreadful, stinking pit in 1888. It still is, in my opinion, actually. And some people believe that victim number 5 met her killer in that pub. Now, victim number 5 was a lady called Mary Jane Kelly, and she was different to the other victims in some really crucial ways. Firstly, she was very young. She was about 23 when she died. Secondly, she was apparently very beautiful, but most significantly, she was the only one of the killer's victims to have been killed inside, where he could take his time. She was seen alive for the very last time at 11:45 p.m. on the 8th of November, very, very drunk indeed, staggered into the room in which she lived and sang very loudly till about 1 o'clock in the morning. Everything then went silent. 4:30 in the morning, her upstairs neighbour hears a low cry. That low cry was, "Oh, murder." Well, when the police asked her about it further, she said, "Well, I just went back to sleep. I didn't take it very seriously at all because this area is very dangerous anyway." 10:45 the next morning, a young man called Tom Bowyer comes to collect the rent from Mary Jane Kelly. He knocks on her door, there's no reply. He then sees that her window is broken and there's a big hole in the window. The hole's so big he can put his hand in. He does, moves the curtain to one side. What he sees absolutely horrifies him. He tells his boss tells the police, they seal off this area, and they then have to wait for the 2 dogs, for Barnaby and Burgo. And they wait until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they hear that Barnaby and Burgo have been sent home because the head of the Metropolitan Police Force has resigned. So 2 detectives break down the door. One of them slips up in a pool of blood. He comes out, and outside the door on guard, on duty, is a young policeman by the name of Walter Dew. Now, Walter Dew, later on in his life, was to become famous in his own right as the man who arrested another murderer, a man called Dr. Crippen. And he wrote his autobiography. And in his autobiography, he tells the tale of being on duty that particular day. And he said, the direct detective came out and he said to me, "Young man, whatever you do not look in that room." Walter Dew goes on to say he then made the biggest mistake he's ever made in his life because he did look in that room. And he'd never been able to forget what he saw. Basically, Mary Jane Kelly had been killed in the same way as the other victims, but that's where all comparison stops. The killer had found everything he could burn in the room and burnt it in the fireplace, in a fire that was so fierce it started to melt the kettle that was sitting above it. Her throat had been slashed twice, right back to the spine again. All of her clothes had been removed. Her face had been completely peeled. Her torso had been completely peeled. All of her internal organs had been taken out. She'd been completely disemboweled. Her heart was missing. The flesh of her legs had been hacked off with a machete, and her hand was placed inside her own empty stomach cavity. All of this, and yet nobody saw or heard anything whatsoever. The killer slipped off in the early morning and was certainly never seen or heard of again around these parts. And these killings stopped around here. So what happened to him? Well, I'm afraid I can't tell you. Over 1,000 people were arrested in connection with these killings, but nobody was ever charged. There was no evidence, no physical evidence against anybody at all. A lot of people came under suspicion. As I said, over 1,000 people were arrested. One of the difficulties was that the police had never encountered before somebody who was clearly just killing for pleasure. They had no template for investigating this. That's only one of the reasons. The other reason was they were inundated with information. Another reason was that they were so worried about trying to keep social order around here that sometimes they messed up parts of the investigation. They didn't catalogue things the way that they do now. Literally every single social strata at one particular point was under investigation, literally from the very lowest of the low to members of the royal family. At one point the police got so desperate they believed the killer might be the poor actor who was playing in the West End Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm sure you must know that story of the man. Well, they believed he might actually finish the show in the West End, come over here, drink a bottle of something crazy and go around killing these prostitutes. Quite extraordinary. So I'm afraid anybody who tells you they know who Jack the Ripper is lying. We will never know his true identity. However, as I've said before, with hindsight we've been able to build up a profile of what that man must have been like. For many years people thought it might have been a woman, a Jill the Ripper. Well, so far history tells us that female serial killers, so far in history, have never killed for sexual reasons. Female serial killers have always either killed for money or revenge. Okay, gentlemen, you've been warned, right? Male serial killers almost always kill for sexual reasons, and this person was definitely killing for their own sexual pleasure. Profilers would now say that our most likely killer was a man who was born in that area over there, who lived in one of those rooms with 10 or 12 people in, and because of the nature of these killings, he was probably sexually abused by one or more women during his infancy. He then grew up physically impotent, but with a desire to have sex with women using a knife. Really, really unpleasant. He might well have worked in the local hospital. The likelihood is that he was probably arrested and questioned by the police and then released. And what happened to him, statistically, the most likely ending for him is that he probably died a little while after the last killing, most likely of alcoholism. The death rate from here, in this area of town, from alcoholism was absolutely huge. But beyond that, I'm afraid we can't really say. We'll never be able to tell you his name, and that's the most likely person it could be, just from what we know now about serial killers. Yes?
Did they ever find any, alcohol that matched him, that the fact that, maybe he was drunk while he was doing it?
They wouldn't have been physically able to to capture that in those days.
Yeah,
because the only way of preserving things was in alcohol. So many things, livers and human body parts were kept in alcohol. We didn't have anything like that kind of level of forensic science, I'm afraid. And also because stuff started to rot and go off very, very quickly, they didn't have a way of containing it and keeping it in a state that would be interesting or useful to them even very, very shortly afterwards. So really, really difficult. Scientifically, we've come on leaps and bounds since then. So what can we say about this man ultimately? Well, one, he was physically very strong. Two, he was very, very good with a knife. Three, he had some detailed medical knowledge. He was able to locate human body organs and remove them very, very quickly. Four, he knew this area like the back of his hand, which means he was able to escape from the police so often with such incredible skill. And fifthly, he is without doubt 100% dead. There's no way a human being could live this long. He's now entered into the realms of altogether other types of fiction. He's now fought with Captain Kirk on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. He's now fought with Dracula. He's now murdered Lulu in the Wedekind plays. So he's clearly moved into a whole other sphere of terror. But his name held an incredibly potent force even many, many years after these killings. And in fact, it's rumoured that around here, parents used to say to their children, if you don't behave, I'll set Jack the Ripper on you.
Oh, wow.
Great parenting skills, says a lot about the English, I think. It's also said that around here, the kids in the schools used to sing a skipping song in the playground. And that skipping song used to go, Jack the Ripper's dead. He's lying in his bed. They've cut his throat with sunlight soap. Jack the Ripper is dead. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions about this massive case? It is huge, and we could never get to cover anywhere near 10% of it on a short tour like this.
You said that people think the victim's ghost is in there? Why there's just been accounts of
Yeah, well, people who look after, who are keen on ghosts to,